Good afternoon, everyone. In terms of sessions, and I've done several of these types of sessions, generally the one before lunch is really difficult because everyone wants to leave and get something to eat. And then when you come right back from having lunch, most people have, I think as one of the panelists said yesterday, have had a nice meal. And, so the goal would be to keep this entertaining for you. We have some distinguished panelists up here today, and we're going to have a conversation, as Peter said, about the foundations that need to be in place in order to ensure the success of the Smart Africa Manifesto. At its core, the Smart Africa Manifesto is about the specific steps that are required in order to connect Africans to each other and to the world, in order to innovate within Africa, and ultimately in order to transform Africa. And that's what we're going to be focused on during today's session. Our panelists today, and in no specific order, so please do raise your hand when I call your name. We have Mr. Magnus Mchunguzi, who is the Vice President and Managing Director of Ericsson South Africa. We have Ambassador Jendayi Frazer, who's the Chairman of the Board of East African Exchange and the former Assistant U.S. Secretary of State for African Affairs. We also have Dr. James Garrett. He's the chairman of Carnegie Mellon University in Rwanda and the dean of the School of Engineering. We also have Mr. Sindiso Ngwenya, who is the Secretary General of the Common Market for Eastern and Southern Africa, COMESA. And we have Mr. Chris Vane, who is from the World Bank, is the Chief Innovation Officer. So, in order to sort of set the stage, I'm going to play a video for you. This is a video that we have courtesy of Magnus. I think it provides a good backdrop for the conversation that we're going to be having in terms of articulating the journey from a telecommunications standpoint that the African continent has been through over the last several years. So let's cue the video, please.
The drum is renowned throughout Africa. Its distinct rhythmic beat, heard across the continent, forms a strong thread that connects more than 1 billion people, that effortlessly spans deserts, bridges, rivers, crosses mountains, that brings together communities and religions, dialects and languages, cultures and philosophies. This is a network of 1 billion touchpoints, 1 billion minds and dreams. This is building the network society in Africa, the drumbeat of Africa. In the last 2 decades, this network has become even stronger because of the telecom revolution. The telecom revolution has crossed countless barriers of infrastructure and geography to reach places no one had access before, to touch lives and access markets thus far untapped, changing the way Africans connect socially, culturally, and economically. With the advent of broadband, this revolution has entered a whole new era. And now, with mobile broadband, we believe that we're at the cusp of a paradigm shift where we can try out new logics, smart tools, and innovative business models to catalyze innovation and change, and get inspired to get even further, making it possible for every African to connect with every other in a seamless flow of idea, thoughts, and commerce, which weaves together the overlapping realities, both social, cultural, and economic. This is the Network Society in Africa, the drumbeat of Africa, which integrates every aspect of Africa, its people, business, and society into one single progressive network. All this this will be powered by the network, the fundamental building block of this ICT transformation. For this, holistic systems, future-proof designs, simplified automation, and consolidated operations are needed. Solutions are truly smart, scalable, simple, and with superior performance, creating business and economic value. At Ericsson, we know that this new era of mobile broadband will empower new ecosystems, push boundaries, and create value, integrating the world seamlessly with technology, realizing the true potential of every individual and organization. Through various initiatives, we continue to drive this vision and demonstrate our dedication to building a networked society in Africa, the drumbeat of Africa. Let's connect like never before, and the beat goes on.
So thank you, Magnus, for that video. I think it does a great job of really sort of capturing the journey over the last several years. The telecoms revolution is very, very real, and as if you've heard over the last day, as well as today, there's been a tremendous amount of progress that's been made. The most exciting part about this, though, is when you look forward and, let's say we were living in the future, 10 years from now, when we look back, it's going to be remarkable the amount of progress that's going to be made over the next, say, 10 years and the exponential growth that will come with that, and what all of that will mean, for the continent. So format-wise, I'm going to open by asking one question. I'm going to ask each of the panelists to spend a few minutes just speaking to that. Then after that, I have a couple of questions which I'll ask, and then we'll very quickly get to the point where we can open it up to you guys to ask your questions so that we can have an interactive session. So the question that I'm going to start with is asking each of the participants to spend, a minute or two helping us understand, what they have done or are doing in their respective areas to address one of the three things that we're discussing on the panel today. And just to remind everyone, it's either to connect Africans to each other and the world, it's to drive innovation within Africa, and it's to ultimately transform Africa. They can pick any one of those three topics and speak to it. And let's start from the Dean.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. What I'd like to do is touch on the middle of the 3 points that you mentioned, mostly innovation. In Pittsburgh, and I know as well here at our CMU Rwanda campus, we're doing research and cooperating with companies to look at the role that ICT can possibly play in making infrastructure smarter. And you might ask, what does that term infrastructure mean? By that, I don't just mean the broadband infrastructure, which is very important. I mean all the other infrastructure that was talked about this morning. President Kagame himself had indicated how important it was as we build buildings to start to put ICT into buildings. But I'm promoting, and my colleagues are promoting, the idea of using ICT to manage our bridges, our highways, our power grid. And the reason we promote that and as a basis of innovation is that infrastructure is very expensive to build, very expensive to maintain. In the United States, there's $5 trillion worth of built infrastructure. In Africa, it's estimated that approximately $93 billion US dollars of infrastructure has to be built in sub-Saharan Africa each year, and $30 billion of that is going to be spent maintaining it. So there is a huge opportunity. This is a huge opportunity for Africa to leapfrog and build ICT into all of this infrastructure that's being built. And you don't have to stop with buildings. You can build this into all of those various pieces of infrastructure, saving time, saving money, and saving large numbers of resources. So to do that, to have that innovation, it's not going to be something that one buys off the shelf. There is going to be research necessary, as was talked about today as well. That these solutions have to be developed in the African context. Even though there has been a lot of research and products developed in this area, I think there's a lot more that can be done within Africa to, in fact, bring that technology to bear and, in fact, address a fairly large opportunity for innovation within the African context. Thank you.
Thank you. Ambassador?
Thank you very much. I always go for the big idea, so I'm going to go for Transform Africa. And specifically, as President Museveni said this afternoon, that the agricultural sector is the foundation sector, especially for Africa, in a continent in which the majority of employment comes through agriculture, and food security is so important, and a continent that has the most arable land in the world. And so the opportunity is tremendous if one can organize that sector and particularly make it globally competitive. And from that perspective, we, working in partnership, this is the East Africa Exchange, working in partnership with the government of Rwanda and the East Africa Community Secretariat, is establishing a regional commodity exchange. And the purpose of that regional commodity exchange is, as I said, to transform agriculture. Specifically, one of the biggest challenges that most farmers, producers have is price transparency. Many of the trades that take place on a bilateral basis, and so no one knows what the price is that others are getting. And so I think many of you who know agriculture and know smallholders, the challenges that they have is a trader will come by and just tell them, I'll pay for that field, and give them any price. And they have no way of knowing whether it's a good price or a bad price. And so with the electronic trading platform, which we're bringing, which is a NASDAQ trading platform, the trades become into the system and you get price discovery, price transparency. And so I think that's the first thing. It empowers farmers to be able to know what a good price is for their produce. And I will remind everyone, of course, that many of those farmers are actually women. So that's one aspect of it, but it's a multiple dimension innovation or technology solution. It also reduces risk. And here, typically, many transactions don't take place, and especially when you're talking about trade across borders or trade globally. The risk that when you put your produce forward, you're not actually, the person who's buying it is not actually going to pay, or when you're trying to buy a product, some agricultural produce, the quality of it is not going to be what you thought you were buying. And so there's this huge barrier that is there for, especially, as I said, cross-border and international trade. The way an electronic platform and the exchange will operate is it's an institution, so the seller essentially sells to the exchange and the buyer sells to the exchange, and the exchange acts as a counterpart and reduces the risk and therefore facilitates more trade, more transactions. So those are two of the ways. And then I'll just finally say a last way. So trade competitiveness is part of it, global trade competitiveness by bringing the market across East Africa together, price transparency so you can empower the farmer themselves is extremely important. And then it is part of a broader capital market solution because what you can do is on that same platform not only trade agricultural produce, but also trade metals, minerals, any type of product. It's the innovation that matters, and the quality, the standard. You can standardize the product as well as you can guarantee the quality through the warehousing and other means. And so it's that standardization that someone knows that they're going to get exactly what they're paying for, quality as well as the volume that they're paying for. And so I think that with this exchange, and again, not only the Rwanda market, but 130 million people are connected by the commodity exchange in East Africa.
Thank you so much. By the way, I should just give one disclaimer. I'm not a professional presenter like Mr. Ndoro, who has set such a very high standard up here, so I didn't summarize after the Dean spoke. So let me just summarize what I heard from both of our panelists. In the case of the ambassador, she talked about the fact that creating essentially what are marketplaces, competitive marketplaces that drive price transparency and openness is essential. We produce a lot of commodities here on the continent, and creating these efficient marketplaces is just great for the development of the continent. And also, by the way, when this marketplace is created, starting with agriculture, it could be applied to a variety of other sectors. So it's really the first step in a direction that could open up to several other possibilities. In the case of the Dean, he talked about making infrastructure smarter. And that's also very, very, very important, because there's several aspects of our lives that today, or several things that we do from an infrastructure standpoint that could just be so much more efficient, that he highlighted a couple of examples in that regard. So please, Magnus.
Thank you. I'm Okaro. Good afternoon. I wanted to talk about innovation and connectivity. And I'd like to begin by what has happened today and yesterday. My cellular phone was taken away. There was no PowerPoint. And I've been trying to imagine living without my cellular phone. Every moment I've been trying to reach into my pocket, and it's not been there. So imagine, and I thought back, how long have we lived with this device to make sure that everybody wants to be around it? In our industry, when we talk about mobility and we talk about connectivity, which leads to innovation, what we say that we have created a kind of an addiction. And this addiction is seen in what we have built. I'd like to take a bit of a step back into memory lane. In 1993, when I left school and came back to Africa, I'm from Tanzania, I remember trying to make a call. At that time, there was no possibility of making any call. I had to go and do a call back and get into my dad's office to make a call to a colleague. And then in 1994, the evolution began. By 1994, we had only less than 0.2% penetration in Africa. If you take out South Africa, we're very, very low in penetration. When you forward now to what we have today, we are now over 500 million people connected. And if you look at those numbers together, we are now over 50-60% penetration. So when we talk about innovation, we believe that connecting people in less than 20 years, 500 million people, is really the biggest innovation we've done. And to do this, we've done it by building networks across Africa, which before you couldn't call across the continent. You had to go outside the continent. And furthermore, we've helped to simplify how people live together. One point I want to mention here, when I was living in my life as a young man, I only knew almost 2 countries in Africa. I was more like, I thought about Tanzania, which was my home. I went to school in Kenya. And then at that point, I thought that living in Europe was part of my journey. But by connectivity, it has enabled me to become an African. Today, I've lived in Nigeria, I've lived in Kenya after, in my kind of life. So what I want to encourage you, that sometimes we think innovation is a big thing, but it's a very small thing that happen within us. So what have we done as Ericsson as a company? Today, 40% of the traffic that is going across Africa goes through our solution that we provided and built. We've been in Africa for almost 117 years, but we've been with the mobility journey, we've been part of the standardization, part of building these networks on the continent, and I'm proud to say here in Rwanda, we have about 80% of the calls going through here in Rwanda. So we call Rwanda Ericsson's home territory, so I'm feeling like I'm at home when I'm here. I'm not feeling like I'm traveling to another place across the continent. So when we talk about the 2 things, mobility, I talk about connectivity, and I talk about prepaid. And I want all of you to remember that prepaid was built here in Africa, or created in Africa. And it's one thing that ushered in the journey we have today, because we were able then to connect a lot of people that were not connected before. What I'm looking for, and which I would like all of us to talk about in the course of the discussion, what would be the killer application that we need to create for data to take off? Because At the moment, everybody can buy a recharge card to make sure they can call and talk to everybody. What are those applications we need to make for common man and woman on the street to go out and buy data? And that will also enable this mobile broadband and all the services that should come with it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So I actually didn't quite realize that. I knew that Ericsson was in the infrastructure business, but I didn't know that 80% of the calls in Rwanda were carried, went over Ericsson's infrastructure. One of the things that you highlighted was, just to simplify how we connect people, and you also, I think, challenged the audience to think about creative ways that could be done, because, building the highways as they might be is certainly a platform that is needed, but what runs on top of it is really where a lot of the excitement really takes place. So thank you very much. Mr. Chris Vane?
Thank you. So it's going to be difficult for me to follow directions, and so I apologize for that, because what you see behind you is the three words of innovate, transform, and connectivity. And indeed, those three pillars, as we call them in the bank, are part of our strategic approach in the continent of Africa, indeed around the world. And we have a strategy that guides all of the activities that the World Bank and the World Bank Group. For those of you who may not be familiar with the World Bank Group, we're actually 5 banks. You heard from the IFC this morning. And in total, over the last 7 years or 10 years, we've contributed more than $4 billion into the work of those 3 items: connectivity, transformation, and innovation. So it's very difficult for me to separate just one. So let me quickly run through each one in order. So connectivity. The bank has, for decades, been involved in building out the connectivity infrastructure here in Africa. We have had projects building out the Central African backbone. We've worked regionally in creating regional backbone networks. We've worked to actually lay the submarine cabling that connects Africa to Europe and other parts of the world. So we have been working to not only physically create those networks, but to create the policies, the infrastructure, the regulations around their effective use, and really enabling the connectivity that is enabling the transformation to take place. So let me move to transformation for a minute. When we have been working in the public sector, and specifically in Africa, what we've been talking about is taking all of those verticals that we've been hearing about this morning: agriculture, health, education, taxation, business licensing, and actually working with our clients, our partners, if you will, and actually working through how we can use ICT to revolutionize the delivery of those services, to make them more efficient and effective, and truly excite the user, the taxpayers, the citizen of every country that we work in to understand how government through ICT is actually enabling and meeting their needs more efficiently. And lastly, but not least, is innovation. And there are many ways of looking at innovation, and I'll touch on some of them again when I have an opportunity to talk specifically about this. But what we've often been doing is working on the general capacity within a country to actually take the tools of connectivity and transformation and really, through a sense of self-empowerment, create their own value within their particular country, within their particular state or particular city, by creating the human capacity, the training, the certifications, the building of the environment of both producing and selling services, and really how that innovation can work and embed it into the very society, the very culture of the countries that we serve. So with all due respect, it's hard to separate because we combine all 3 of them into one as we truly help to transform Africa.
Thank you. I mean, if I were to summarize, I think one word really captures it, and that's the word you said, which is self-empowerment. Everything that you talked about ultimately leads to self-empowerment, from the connectivity infrastructure itself to everything from an enablement standpoint that you've put behind that. And $4 billion is a lot of money. So thank you for that. Let's please hear from Mr. Ngwenya.
Well, thank you very much. Now, let me say at the outset that the three pillars, innovate, connect, and transform, the way we operate as an organization, they are all interlinked. They are not, separate. And let me also say at the very outset that when you look at both pillars, what we are talking about is something that disrupts the way through ICT, the way business is done, or if I can use the expression of disruptive, technology. I listened very attentively and carefully this morning when His Excellency President Museveni, who is my chair of my Heads of State and Government Committee, addressed these issues from the point of view of application. And therefore, let me then proceed to say the following in terms of what we do, very, very briefly, to say when it comes to connectivity, as was indicated by my colleague from the World Bank, as regional organizations, we have been responsible for, with the convening powers, for bringing countries together in order for them to agree on the priorities for infrastructure investment, be it the submarine fiber optic cables or the backbones that we are talking about. So we play that role. But we also play the role of, at a legislative level, of getting, countries to agree on defining what is it that governments will do, what is it that the regulators will do, and the other stakeholders. And in that regard, we have the COMESA model telecommunication bill, which out of the 19 countries, more than 60% have implemented. And let me indicate here that when we talk about implementation, you have a decision and then you have got the domestication at the national level, because if you don't have that, then you cannot do anything. The only exception among the regional economic communities in Africa is the East African community, which does not go through a domestication process at national level, but which goes through the East African Legislative Assembly. But the effect is the same. Let me hasten to say that this is my literal interpretation. I cannot see my judge president for the Court of Lower Instance, the COMESA Court of Justice. He was there this morning, but he will tell you, if he was here, that they recently made a ruling on this domestication when there was a litigation by a private individual over the non-compliance by one member state, and I'll not mention them. They made the ruling that the failure to domesticate that council decision did not absolve that particular country from its obligations, and therefore they had to pay compensation to the private sector. So this is what we do. And if you want to look at it from a transformational point of view, you will say this is transformational because we are having these changes. Now, regarding innovation, very quickly, to say I've heard about what is happening in terms of e-commerce. Let me simply say here, and you check the East African, the Trilateral Summit, decision, you'll find that one of the facilitation instruments which has been incorporated by the Trilateral Summit is what we call the COMESA Virtual Trade Facilitation System. There is a confusion here because some people talk about it as tracking the cargo and the vehicle. But for us, it is more than that. Because what we have done, we have software that we have developed to integrate some of our instruments like the third-party insurer, the customs bond guarantee. We're integrating weighbridge control so that you again remove what His Excellency said this morning, the interface between those who are doing the enforcement and those who are traveling. For example, just give you an example, one of the modules we have is that when you have that, there is no need for the police to be standing on the highway to check the vehicle, because once you tag the truck, you will be able to tell the speed of that truck. Sitting in Lusaka, for example, I can tell the speed of the trucks that are tagged on the northern corridor from Mombasa to Kigali. You can also tell the diversion of the trucks. So that is innovation. Now, I've spoken about innovation, I've spoken about connection, and I've also referred to transformation. Last but not least, on e-commerce, because I heard my sister here, my good friend Jendayi Frazer, talking about the commodity exchange, to say that we shall be launching as COMESA an e-commerce with different applications. But it is different from e-commerce because we have integrated, in terms of the software, the manufacturers with the retailers, so that the manufacturers can also in real time be able to tell what the stock levels are at the retail level, instead of them sending people to do that. So these are all the applications that we have, but I don't have to say more because we shall wait until you see the product. The other one I've spoken about is already online. The other one I launched it in Zambia, and I'll be launching it in Kenya in the coming days. I thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. I mean, one of the things that the presidents talked about yesterday and also talked about earlier today was the fact that it's rather essential that they all work together, and that they face many similar challenges and have a unique opportunity to work together. And what Mr. Ngwenya talked about, which is very, very important, is that one of the things that they focus on doing is bringing these countries together, and even more importantly than that, it's getting agreement on the roles of the different participants. That's really sort of essential for anything that requires collaboration, particularly when you have different parties involved. So I'm going to go ahead and ask the panel another question. I run a multi-billion-dollar business myself, and in order to identify market opportunities, in order to continuously innovate, innovative solutions generally have a very, very, very short life. You have to continuously innovate. Innovation isn't something you just do and then you go home. As a business, you die when you stop innovating, because you're in business to continue to grow, and the way you continue to grow is by continuing to innovate. So I'm going to read a quick quote and then pose a question to the panel. Albert Einstein said, "If I have an hour to solve a problem, I'd spend 55 minutes thinking about the problem and 5 minutes thinking about the solutions." The question I have for the panel is, how do we equip, we've heard a lot about our entrepreneurs and the youth, how do we equip our entrepreneurs and youth with the necessary training and tools to be able to identify and quantify these market opportunities, to build business plans, to raise funding, and the list goes on and on? How will we do that? In essence, how do we give them everything they need in order to build and run successful companies created by Africans and led by Africans? So let's go ahead and let's actually start with Magnus on that question.
Okay. First of all, let me tell you what we are doing as a company and then share with you what we can do as a continent. We believe that the first thing is capacity building if we're going to make it successful on the continent. What we've done as a company, we have built regional support centers and competence centers. So we have one in Nigeria, we have one in DRC, because those are really massive countries, so if you can create critical mass of people. So we're trying to, first of all, train people on the technologies to ensure that they know how to manage the technologies, how to build the technologies. And what we've seen, once people get to know how the technologies are built and managed, they always leave and go and create their own opportunities. And we've created a lot of companies in terms of service provision, but now we believe we need to go much greater than what we have done before and enable people to go out and learn how the technology are created. So that's the dream that I see need to be catalyzed. Because if you don't train and give capacity to our people, then there's no way you can achieve any of these things. The second point that I think is always really uppermost in my mind, which I've seen across the continent, is that those people have got the skills. You know, I include myself in this game. We need to do a lot of mentorship. There are a lot of young guys and kids and women who have a lot of ideas, who have started companies, but what they're lacking is simple ideas or people stepping up and helping them to put together a very simple business plan, show them how to put a strategy, and also how to execute. I think this is something we, guys who are in corporate especially, who have had all the training, can be able to impart on the young entrepreneurs in Africa. And the final point, which I've seen a lot now, there's a lot of young men and women with a lot of ideas. We need to find a way to create a venture fund, and I hope my colleague from the World Bank here and the people involved in the financial sector will talk to the idea of how do we create private equity on this continent. These young men and women are not looking for lots of money. They're looking for $2,000, $10,000 to buy a computer to start creating applications. And then when we couple that with the training and the knowledge and the mentorship, I think we can now start creating the kind of companies and future we want for the people. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Since you called on the World Bank, I guess we should ask Mr. Vane to chime in for a second and give us his thoughts on this.
So let me start with the general answer, and then I'll get to the specificity that you're looking for. From the World Bank standpoint, our customers are governments. So I'm going to talk about 4 areas specifically that we're working in or on to help governments create the environment, if you will, that will help individual entrepreneurs and business growth. I think the first is really a mind shift change. You know, there's never going to be enough time, enough money, resources, people to actually solve the problems that governments face. The problems are large, they're intractable. And so what we're learning is that actually governments need to become a platform. They need to provide the ability for others to take their resources, the public goods that they offer, and really create that value. And it's a mind shift change. It's not that the government needs to nor should be providing all products and services and everything that a citizen or an entrepreneur needs, but actually can create and open up government so other organizations, other people can actually create that value. So it's really this idea of government as a platform. The second, though, and very related to that, is that the community becomes the capacity. When you open up the government, when you invite others in to co-create those solutions, you invite the private sector, you invite the citizen sector, you invite the entrepreneurs in to actually be co-creators of those solutions and effectively transform your workforce to your economy and invite them in to create the value. The third thing is that the customer has to become the approach in that kind of philosophy. What we've learned from Silicon Valleys of the world or from Kenya is that, as other Silicon Valley type organizations, what we've learned is that we as development institutions, government organizations, cannot forget that we need to be thinking about how the user, the end user of the products and services that we're putting together, that we're funding, that we're creating, we actually build them into our thinking and really invite them in again to that process so that what we build actually solves the problem that we've been trying to address. And then lastly is to your idea about empowerment. If you look at the technological advances in the world, if you look and believe, as some vendors would describe the Internet of Everything, where there are going to be 50 billion connections to the Internet of people and things by the year 2020. You look at the huge impact that mobile telecommunications has had. You look at the impact of social, Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, and the whole social media. Talk about big data, and this morning we looked at and talked about 3D printing as something that could potentially revolutionize industrial policy in this continent, you realize that all of this is marching toward this idea of government empowerment, individual empowerment. And I think that is what has to be harnessed and is being harnessed. And what we in the bank are trying to do is help governments understand these driving forces and create the right environment for the entrepreneurs to actually come in and be able to survive and thrive, because we know that government can constrict that capacity, that government, whether it means to or not, can actually create negative forces for that innovation to take place. So what we're trying to do is create that environment, and then very specifically to your point about funding for small businesses. Unfortunately, the way the World Bank is set up, we tend to favor large projects, infrastructure projects, projects that governments or others can't quite afford to do on their own. But I will tell you that there is a move within the bank, and most often within the IFC, who deals with more of the private sector part of the institution, to actually develop those kinds of funds. And in fact, next month when I'm back in Washington, I'm meeting with the CFO of the World Bank about how we can develop a fund specifically for small businesses that are using open data. We haven't even talked about open data yet, but are using open data to create new kinds of companies that would actually showcase the value of openness in government.
Thank you very much. So I just want to highlight that we only have half an hour left to go. So please, panelists, if you may, if you can keep your responses as short as possible, that will enable us to quickly get to the point where we can open it up to the audience to ask a couple of questions. But if I were to summarize what I heard, it's practical training in strategy and execution. It's mentoring, which is really important wherever you are in the world. You know, I spend a lot of my time doing this as well. And it's the governments, need to become more of a platform, and that, you have to put customers first. A joke that we often make is, do we have a solution in search of a problem, or do we have a problem and we are going to go search for a solution? Many a times, people have a clear sense of what they want to do, and they have a solution, and then they go hunting for the problem to solve, and many times that's why they misfire. They're actually not solving a real problem. So, Ambassador, I think you may have to run rather soon. So, I have a question for you, which is, there's power in unity, and there's power in numbers. Actually, this is a quote that Dr. Martin Luther King made several years ago. A question for you would be, what can we do? We talked about the, sort of the commodities markets, but what can we do to have a more enabling environment for that, across the continent, and in a way that kind of integrates the respective markets? I think you and Ms. Ngwenya would have some really good thoughts on this one.
Sure, thank you. I was all prepared to answer the former question, but that's fine, because I agree with everything that was said before, and maybe I can bridge the two questions by specifically focusing on the issue of capital and the importance, particularly in, as we said, agriculture is a major employer, but it's also, it should be the source of entrepreneurship for young people. There's a real future in agriculture, and one of the ways in which we can help those young people realize that future is by access to capital, and the commodity exchange has another technology solution, which is the electronic warehouse receipt system, which is essentially a way in which banks, you can collateralize your produce and get credit from banks, so that you can then hold on to that produce and not sell it to the next trader who's coming by and is offering you any old price. And so it gives greater power again, and it helps businesses come out so the smallholders can actually produce more than they consume. And so it makes business people out of smallholder farmers, and hopefully it creates the realization in young people that they don't have to run to the cities to get jobs or to become business people, that they can continue to do that in the rural areas where agriculture is so important. So how do we, as a commodity exchange, is not just about transformation nationally, but is indeed about creating that regional integration, which gives greater market size and creates greater liquidity. What are some of the barriers, or what could governments do? We haven't realized the barriers yet because we've just started, and we're blowing past some of them because this is a relatively new institution to be introduced in this region, and therefore many of the capital markets authorities don't know how to deal with it. Right? And so in some ways we're self-regulatory, and in other ways the problems, I guess I should say the sector is largely unregulated, so business can thrive before they start regulating you and pulling you back. And so we're going to run as fast as we can to create the practice that then supports the regional integration. And for instance, one thing that would help, obviously, or one of the challenges that we could potentially face is that there's no single currency, right? And so a capital market authority could undermine us by saying that what's the currency that the exchange is going to use? Is it going to use the currency of the national exchange? So everybody who trades on the Rwanda exchange have to use the Rwanda franc, or will they be able to use the currency of the supplier of the product, or are they going to use some common currency like the US dollar on the exchange? That issue is one that could be a challenge to that further integration. Another challenge could be on the legislative side, right? The question becomes on warehousing. And in fact, we found this in Rwanda, where there was a moment in which the Capital Markets Authority was defining their regulations towards the commodity exchange and warehousing, and they were saying that you can only trade product on the exchange that comes from warehouses that are licensed by the authority in the country. That would be a barrier to the type of regional exchange that we're looking for. And so we really do need, with this new, relatively new institution, we have that opportunity, working closely with the capital markets authorities and the ministers of finance within the East Africa community, to, one, not allow the legislation to constrain us, but also to write the regulations in a way that actually will bolster regional trade. So I think starting, instead of having a number of national institutions that then you have to marry, starting from the strategy of regional from the outset creates tremendous opportunity for the East Africa community.
Thank you very much. I mean, again, if I were just to summarize that, it seems like you and Mr. Ngwenya should have a really, really strong partnership, because, his focus is on connecting countries and bringing together the key players and ensuring that there's clarity of role and responsibility. And you're out front, ahead of the policies, and you're going to help shape what those policies should be. Many a times, companies find themselves behind the policies, and the policies are stifling. Yes. But fortunately, in this regard, you're ahead and have the opportunity to figure out what makes sense, and then work with the policymakers to put in place the right regulatory framework such that business can thrive, and the governments also themselves can do very well. So I think that's excellent. Mr. Ngwenya, I don't know whether you want to chime in, whether you have any particular thoughts you want to share on this topic.
It's on this topic and other topics. Let me simply, you quoted Einstein, Albert Einstein. Let me quote him differently. When he defines madness as doing the same thing over and over again, expecting a different results. I thought that when we said innovate, connect and transform, we are not talking about what we know, but we are simply saying the solutions are out there. I'll start with the issue of capacity building. To say, in my view, we need to be transformational in capacity building. Because when you look at most of our countries, the educational curriculum, it produces job seekers. It does not produce people who are capable of creating jobs for themselves. So we need to have a paradigm shift, mindset with respect to that. And secondly, because I want to be very brief, When we talk about, I heard my colleague from the World Bank saying they are trying to see what could be done. But I think, let's look, the Americans say, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. And also, if you look at it, that you don't reinvent the wheel, if you look at what works in terms of the startup companies, in America, in the UK, etc., you'll find that venture capital plays a role. You also have got angel, capital playing that role. I think we need to look at these issues differently, because if we continue doing things that we have done over the years, we're not going to achieve much. Last but not least, on the issue of electronic commerce, payments, etc., to say that, you see, it is not the policies and regulations that affect electronic commerce, including electronic payments, but it is the electronic commerce, the payment systems that make the policymakers formulate the regulations. And this is why you'll find at the moment that the regulators are trying to put all kinds of taxes on mobile phones, etc., because they think that's a cash cow. But let me warn here that we still have the highest rates in terms of telecommunications. 2002, 2004 were $3 per minute. We are now at 0.8 US cents per minute, which is very high. Or if you look at France, you'll find that France, you pay $27 per month, for almost everything, including phoning internationally. But that's what we pay here. So we must be able to look at all these things and say, have we made any meaningful progress? Or yes, we have made it, but it is not enough to enable accessibility and to enable, people to benefit from what we are talking about. That's why I started by quoting Albert Einstein. I thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Now, one of the things, and there are many of us, you heard Magnus talk about it. Myself, I'm Nigerian. I studied abroad. I studied in the UK. I studied in the US as well. I live in New York. One of the challenges that we have faced on the continent for several years and continue to face today is the brain drain. People go through high school and they either decide that they want to leave and go abroad to go to university, or they almost certainly leave to go get an advanced degree. So I have a question, and this question I think is perfect for Dr. Garrett. One of the things that we don't suffer from here is we really don't have the baggage of the aging or the obsolescent infrastructure of the developed world. And that makes Africa pretty uniquely positioned to create new and innovative solutions that meet the needs of the African people. So my question to Dr. Garrett is, what role do you see research and development playing? And more specifically, how do we create a research culture? And I want to emphasize that, research culture, so that Africans are equipped to create solutions to challenges that are uniquely African. We can't import everything, and there are only a certain number of things we should import. How are we going to take control of solving our own problems with solutions that are unique to Africa? How are we going to create that research culture?
Thank you. Thank you. As you know, the word culture...
I don't think it's on. Is it on?
Is it on?
There you go.
Yeah. Okay. The word culture is used, I think, very appropriately here, because culture is something that takes a long time to develop. It takes investment. It takes nurturing. And how one develops a research culture is that you start with your educational systems to nurture inquisitiveness, to nurture asking a question that isn't necessarily in the textbook, encouraging students to ask questions of their faculty, and not to have that be viewed as as an imposition. And I don't know if that's the case or not in the African educational system, but I do know that in our systems of education, at least the ones I'm familiar with, we want to encourage students to be seeking answers to questions that they may have. And at the graduate level, in university, the research culture runs very deep. Carnegie Mellon is known as a research university, and what does that mean? What that means is we seek to very strongly understand, very deeply understand the kind of question that you quoted Einstein about. What is the problem? What's the nature of the problem? What are all the different dimensions of that problem before one starts to create a solution? The reason that's important is that research is oftentimes the beginnings of the innovation process. It doesn't mean that innovation has to always start with research, but a research culture is extremely important for having the kind of innovative environment that you talk about. And if you have a research culture and if you have an innovative ecology in Rwanda, that'll solve your brain drain problem. That you will have people, even if they leave, they will come back to participate in that kind of activity. And so, to answer your question, how does one get that started? You have to make investments. You have to look at your educational system and make investments in elementary school, high school, in your universities, and in your graduate programs, such that a research culture is promoted, that you have sources of funds for people to seek answers to those questions that they have. Just as a point, something in the United States that we're quite concerned about is with the sequester and its reduction of federal support for research in our agencies and in the National Science Foundation. There is a serious concern, not about next year, but about 20 years from now. What is going to happen if we don't continue to invest in the research at the level that we have to this day? And so I think in Africa, there needs to be, I think, a greater investment in research activities at all levels to support the growing of a research culture.
Thank you very much. I mean, the main thing, I took a lot away from that, so thank you so much for that. But, I think the main thing, and this is something that I challenge the people on my team to do all the time when it comes to figuring out solutions and when you look at systematic innovation, the what if, asking questions and exploring alternative approaches to solving problems is pretty fundamental. And I think that's one of the things that you're highlighting that, we need to invest in, not only at the undergraduate and graduate level, but even much younger, starting from when kids are in elementary school and secondary school. I'll tell you this. When I was in school, I went to elementary and secondary school in Nigeria. When you ask your teacher a question, I don't know how it is these days, but many a times it's seen as, you being disrespectful. If you're questioning the teacher, I don't understand this. How does this make sense? You could get a smack on the back or told to do angle 90 in the corner, which is this thing that they used to have us do back then. So I hope that isn't still going on these days. But thank you so much for that. Let me just try and summarize. We're going to open this up to questions now. So I don't know if we have the ushers with the mics. They should be ready to get everyone who has a question a microphone. But there's a lot that's been talked about, and I can't find my summary right here. So how about we get the mics out and get some questions first, and then I'll summarize after that. Any questions, please? Okay. Microphone isn't on. We have one here. Okay. Your microphone, I think, is on.
Thank you. Just one precision or question. Why World Bank as a public lender or public or multilateral lender should concentrate on traditional infrastructures like railways, roads, because those contribute to trade development. And quietly, not much get involved into those highly profitable projects like this ICT, and leave it to private sectors or private lenders, but still get connected to assist, like for startups or other regulatory frameworks, still integrate on the future of the economy, or future of the development, by mostly investing on those traditional infrastructures. That's my. I want precision on that.
Let me make sure I understood the question. Did you say, how does one secure funding for more of the, sort of hard infrastructure projects outside of ICT? Is that correct? Was that your question?
ICT, it's a profitable. It's a profitable investment on now and on the near future. So, as a scarcity of money in this world, but that's the reality also. So the available funding from World Bank as a public lender or public multilateral lender, that's based on the scarcity of funding and the availability of funding and fundraising. I'm asking myself, but asking you, if World Bank should not concentrate on those traditional infrastructures like railways, roads. Those contribute also directly to the trade, development, to the investment, to the welfare of populations.
Sure, we got it. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Okay,
thank you. So, Chris, I think that one was directed directly at you. So please, if you may.
There's so many answers to that question, but I think two immediately come to mind. One is, as I've said before, we work with governments, and we are asked to come into governments, and we are asked to loan money based on what a particular country and their government puts priority on. And so for decades, governments have come to us and said, we need your help in building out our ICT capacity, and traditionally that had always been connectivity. And so we are coming in as a lender to governments because they need that money to build out their infrastructure and are willing to borrow from us to do it. But I think one of the more appropriate answer to that question is something that we haven't talked about and was raised this morning, which is public-private partnerships. And I can tell you, and having met with several governments at lunch about how the bank funds get used in public-private partnerships, it is in opening up the capacity within a particular country to the private sector to participate in the delivery of ICT services, and the belief that, as the manifesto said, development or some of this work should be utilizing the private sector first, where we loan money to the government and they use it to match what the private sector is putting up in order to build out, whether it be a network or the services or applications that run on that network. So in essence, what we're doing is helping the government leverage their capacity and bringing in the private sector, so working together, the public sector and private sector can actually solve the particular problem. So I think one of your points is that you don't think the bank should be involved because the private sector can solve all of the particular ICT issues. What we are doing is actually helping the government leverage and bring in private sector to jointly solve these problems in a true public-private partnership.
Thank you very much. Next question, please. I had a gentleman.
I'm Clarence Fernandez. I'm the India representative for Rwanda Development Board in India. And I'm also the co-chairman of the Travel, Tourism and Hospitality Committee for the Indian Merchants Chamber. Our panelists discussed about mentoring and getting the youth who finished their studies to do some work experience. I want to share with them that we have invited 14 management students from Rwanda to come to Mumbai for 2 weeks in January. 1 week they will spend in classroom training, and 1 week they will be with different companies actually learning on the job. There'll be some some international companies, but there'll also be some SMEs. So the students who are interested to start their own entrepreneurship and their own business will be allocated to SMEs in India, and the others will be with multinationals. So this is what we are doing to help bridge the gap between education and the actual workforce. Thank you.
That's fantastic. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Faduma, and I have a question and also a comment with that. You asked the question, how do we create a research Africa? But I also wanted to ask a question of how do we create a new vision of Africa? For years, we've been known as a dark continent. A lot of people look at us as a country that's hopeless and forget the resources that we have. And so as leaders of Africa, I wanted to ask a question is how can you repaint the new vision of Africa? How can we create it so that way people who are students, youth who went out of state to go study, to come back to their country and share the innovation, share their ideas. So how can we create that image? I feel like not a lot of people know how many resources we have in Africa, like all the different things that are coming from different parts of Africa, and we want to educate our youth, but it's up to the leaders to put that out there, and I just wanted to know that if there's any efforts or any way that we can do that together to combine and come together in one type of, I don't know if that makes sense, but I just wanted to
it does.
Question.
It does. Who wants to take that one? Go ahead, Ambassador.
I feel self-conscious answering your question, and I hope some of my other colleagues on the panel will do so as well, because I'm an African many decades removed. But I'm coming from a perspective that, something has rubbed me wrong throughout this discussion, and your question gives me an opportunity to say it, which is, I think part of changing that mindset is not carrying that baggage, right? And I keep hearing, African business built by Africans for Africans to solve African problems. And I understand the spirit of that comment, but I'm thinking what you need are globally competitive companies. And those can be built by anywhere in the world, including Africans, and led by Africans. But the point isn't it's African, it's that it's globally competitive and it solves the problems, right? And so I think that young people need training. They need a culture that promotes inquisitiveness and innovation and that breaks barriers. But I don't see a lack of that in Africa. I mean, I taught at the University of Nairobi. I've taught African students in American universities at Stanford, in Denver, and in Pittsburgh at Carnegie Mellon University. I don't see a lack of challenging a system or inquisitiveness or creativity, creative mindedness. I see the need to have the opportunity, and so creating the enabling environment for those young people and the mindset that says, I can create a global company, and I can use every resource and every individual from anywhere in the world. One of the things that people talk about in terms of American innovation, what they don't realize is we use everybody. Microsoft is not talking about an American company. It is an American company, registered in America. It's a multinational company, and it's got all kinds of Africans from Ethiopia in particular, working at Microsoft, engineers from Nigeria. Why can't African companies just utilize the talent from everywhere and have the mindset to do so? And I'll finish by saying this, right? Because I'm saying something here. I feel that we're in between two spots. One is defensiveness, which comes from the baggage, and then the other is paternalism, right? Which is the West sort of saying, well, we'll teach you, we'll educate you, we can, train you. And I think both of them don't match with a global world in which people are moving all over the place, right? Going home, coming, going to learn here, having jobs there. You are the example of that. As a matter of fact, as you said, Nigerian, educated in America, UK, living in New York, in South Africa, et cetera. And so I think that we're global. We're global people now. And Africa is what President Kagame said. It really is about the opportunity is significant here, the problems are significant here, being realistic about it, and then solving those problems however one can do so. And using whomever one needs to use in whatever technology, whatever resources, from wherever you can get them to solve these problems.
Thank you. Thank you. Please, Magnus,
okay,
30 seconds or
I'll
less,
be very
please.
quick. What I've come to recognize that labor now is global. So if you're going to compete in this world, you have to realize that you are playing on a global level. Yesterday I was talking to a colleague of mine. She said she's now grown a company, but she realized that the people she has are not capable. But I told her that's not a big problem. The problem is that you are looking at labor as a local problem rather than as a global issue, that you can get anybody but build a very strong company. I think today there are a lot of big companies coming out of Africa. What is still lacking is that Africa do not like pulling together capital. If you take most of you here, if you all agree to put together money, we can build one of the biggest companies in the world. But everyone in Africa wants to build their own company, and therefore we can't scale quickly. And to compete globally, you need scale. And if you don't have scale, you cannot really compete. I think we need to start thinking, how can we think together, collectively, instead of each of us doing our own trick. So basically, and also we need confidence. We need to believe who we are. I think we have remained too much believing, listening, and taking instruction from other people. We need to start believing who we are. Don't talk about the dark continent. To me, when someone said to me, is it dark? I said, no, it's an opportunity. If it's too light, there's no opportunity. Now there's an opportunity. Make it light. Take advantage of it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Excellent comments. I would like to add one more comment. The confidence that you are talking about, Magnus, we need to have confidence in ourselves to build these companies, build these applications. But I want to twist that a little bit. Yesterday, I visited the other parallel conference, the Youth Entrepreneurship, Entrepreneurs Own Transform Africa. There was a kid that was almost crying, saying, we build applications, we bring them to our own people, and they don't even look at them. They go and get exactly the same applications from some American, some British, somebody foreign, as long as you're not Rwandan. Now, I just want to say, we are asking our kids to take risks, to go into business. I also want to ask us, as governments, as business owners, to trust our kids and try them out. Take a risk. Don't ask them to take a risk without you yourself wanting to take a risk on them. Thank you.
It's a great comment. Great comment. Yeah, we have a couple of other hands. Go ahead.
Thank you. My name is Sebastian. I'd like to ask someone from World Bank. We heard more about, you say about trainings and empower youth, especially young entrepreneurs, to give them skills, to empower them. But I would like to ask, as World Bank, what is the strategies that you can take to give a follow-up? As in, you have already give them the training skills, but what is the follow-up you do, or what is the strategy you can do in order to do a follow-up of the skills you have given? Thank you.
Excellent question. And I think the answer is that we don't do enough in order to follow up on once we try to create the environment and we try to create the labs, the innovation labs or whatever. that we are actually working on to do. I think we end up coming in and trying and doing our best to actually create the enabling environment and to do that, but we don't necessarily follow through with the next step and the next step and the next step. And so I'd actually love to hear from you. It sounds like you have experience in the lack of follow-up and follow-through, and I'd love to hear from you on what you think we should be doing more of so I can take that back and build it into our programs.
Thank you. Mr. Ngwenya, you want to say something?
Yeah, I just wanted to comment very briefly from what was said by the previous speaker in terms of risk. I think the major challenge that we have is that, yes, they come up with these software applications, but the problem is those software applications have got no value because they don't have the registered intellectual property. And this is why under our Science and Innovation Council, we are addressing that matter. Because what I found, I know the multinationals are here, but I will also indicate what they do. We can take M-Pesa, for example, which was, an application by, an average Kenyan, but which was taken over by companies because there was no registration by that. So we need also to deal with the issue of IP. Because once you have the IP, then you can either develop, you can have a company yourself, or you can sell it, or get royalties from it. So that's another issue that we've got to address. And as a regional organization, we're addressing that. I thank you, sir.
Intellectual property is critical. I mean, there are huge organizations that exist primarily that have thousands of researchers, PhDs, that exist to crank out all of these innovative solutions, and then they license them. So that's a very, very, very valid point. I think we have run out of time, but let's take one last question before we wrap up. One last question.
One here.
Okay, please.
Thank you, Moderator. I'd like to ask about a rather broad question. It's partly addressed to what the ambassador addressed, marketing African products. Yesterday, someone mentioned something about, I think it was a cell phone created in Ghana. Now, I don't know whether that cell phone can compete with Samsung or Apple products, iPhones, or anything like that. I wonder if there is a framework that can be created so that we become competitive, because I think there are regulations all over the place, especially in Geneva, where it might not be possible to standardize to a level where our products are competitive. Thank you.
That's an excellent question. I mean, the bottom line is we want the best products in the world. And in order for us to be competitive here, we have to have products that are as good, if not better, than what we can get from abroad. So, who would like to take that question?
I can take it from a agricultural perspective and tell you how we're looking at this with the agricultural commodity exchange, but I think you were also asking about manufactured, and IT also products. But from the agricultural perspective, by building this commodity exchange and aggregating essentially the product from across the region, we're hoping, one, to be able to create a market where global buyers would be more interested in coming because they can get the economies of scale, the quantities that they're used to purchasing. There's a certain product in East Africa, it's global product, but for instance, Rwanda has the highest quality pyrethrum in the world, right? But it doesn't produce the greatest, it's one of the second largest traders, but it's so small in terms of the actual demand. Pyrethrum is essentially a organic insecticide, and so it's needed globally. If we can, get through the commodity exchange and through the electronic warehouse receipt system, et cetera, capital into the hands of the producers, increase the volumes, Rwanda will be globally competitive. It is globally competitive, you know, in that particular product. So I think we're with the exchange we're doing, looking at innovation in the products themselves, the agricultural products, looking at how we can do tea better and make it more competitive. So that's on one side, and the aggregation helps. The other point on the other side is some of these global standards are intended to crowd out products on the continent. And so who sets the standards becomes extremely important. I'm thinking, for instance, the Securities and Exchange Commission of the United States, which through the Dodd-Frank is putting certain regulations in place, which are going to essentially make it much more difficult for African products from this region to be competitive globally, right? And companies use those products right now, and because of these regulations that are being brought on from outside, are now looking for alternative sources. They're now looking for other countries to go and get these products that they typically got from Africa. And so I think we've got to play both sides of it, make the quality competitive, but also fight on the side of the regulations and set standards here that become the standards that are adopted internationally.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
We can take a couple more questions, actually. We're giving you extra time. Two more questions, and then full time. The referee will blow the whistle.
Okay, but just before the next question, then it seems that...
I want to make a comment on what we need to do in terms of what they've developed in Ghana. I think that in Africa, we need to start believing in our own products. We need to support our own industries. If you look at Korea, they didn't become successful by producing the first best product. I remember Samsung, when it came out, was competing with multinational companies like Nokia, who had the better phones. But they persisted, but the homegrown people believed in their countries. They bought their cars, they bought their phones, they bought everything. So if Africans want to really compete, maybe we have to start saying, you know, if we want to support our products, we really have to buy. And then as we use them, we demand better quality, and they improve and improve. And I think that's really the starting point. It will not be the best from day one. So be encouraged, don't give up.
Right, but you also, you also have to highlight, though, in the case of South Korea specifically, that the environment in terms of the country, they had the right environment to basically foster and facilitate that in terms of being in competition with Japan, and the leader basically deciding that he did not want them to import products from Japan. He wanted them to build it locally, to the point where many times they went back and said that they needed certain machines that they could only get from Japan in order to do certain things. And he said, no, you have to build those here yourself and use locally produced products to, get a lot of that done. So very, very fair point there. So additional questions, please.
Yeah, my name is Rose. My question, just like the theme says, transform Africa. Transform Africa, just like we are just been discussing about getting our own solution since we belong to our place and getting rid out of our problems. But when it comes to the pitching, we see guys like Samsung, Google, Facebook, and then a young innovator who's trying to be who she is or her, or he who wants to get on board, you sit behind. The next minute is like, the conference is over. How are you going to help such guys get on board? 2, maybe such developers are there, so many actually, in school, who can do these things. But nobody believes in their solutions. Nobody sees what they are doing. How will they believe in themselves to keep calling themselves, I'm a developer, or soon they're switching to be secretaries or administrators, and the career is gone. Sorry, I'm not saying that secretaries are not careers, but I'm meaning like you switch career because you cannot wait to be broke for the rest of your life.
It's a very, very valid point. Any takers for that? Yeah, so just to summarize the question, I think what she was highlighting is the fact that we need to provide opportunities, and please correct me if I'm wrong, we need to provide opportunities to help nurture and grow and develop our talent so that they can have, I think, some of what's been discussed here, the confidence to pursue those careers and not have to change course because they've realized that there really isn't much there for them. She used an example of a software engineer who is talented and but doesn't really have opportunities on the ground here. How does one go about creating that environment, I think, that fosters and facilitates, nurtures and develops that?
One of the things I'd like to say is that I've experienced that on a smaller scale, but with our program here at Carnegie Mellon University in Rwanda, these are African students that are in this graduate program. It is a graduate program that is of the same rigor as wherever we offer this program around the globe. And one of the things that I'm very happy to see is that these students are in fact competing very well, and I hear from them the same sort of complaints I hear from my students in Pittsburgh, which is that we have to work hard. I don't get to spend nights and weekends, at other places. I'm working, as hard as I've ever worked in my life. But they are doing it, and they are succeeding. And I think that's what we need to do is to continue to encourage them to engage in that kind of activity, and they will see that they should be confident about what is happening. And I think that will be if we continue to do this in all of the various types of engagements that we have, I think that will be one of the solutions.
Mr. Ngwenya?
Just a very quick response to that. President Kagame said this morning that we must internalize things ourselves, we must believe in ourselves, etc. And this is what I think the lady is talking about. But just to share with you our own experience as a regional organization, is that I discovered within the organization that there were software engineers world class, but they were not doing that, they were just doing routine processes. The systems I spoke about are designed by them. And the average age of these software engineers is 22. They are pretty young. So I think it's also incumbent on those in leadership to ensure that when you identify the talent, you encourage, you inspire them to do the right thing. But it cannot just be done by accident. It must be a conscious, deliberate decision by those that are in leadership. I thank you.
All right. So the referee is calling time now, unfortunately. Just one of those things.
Okay, so I think we've had a sort of a nice, fruitful conversation here. So let me just go ahead and summarize some of the things that we've heard. First is that, as it relates to the mandate or the theme for the panel itself, we've heard that doing R&D in Africa would be important, I think, for further development. We also heard that making infrastructure smarter would be...
Excuse me?
Would be pretty...
Yeah, sorry, I was handed a microphone together with the lady, so the lady was given a chance first. So I wanted to make my point.
All right,
very briefly.
For the sake of peace on our continent, let him just have his quick point, and can we get a very quick response from you? Otherwise, we're not going to get out of here on time. Thanks very much. I'm sorry.
Okay. Thank you. I'm called Frank Mukama. I work with the Youth Employment Systems. It's a global initiative, and it's also here in Rwanda. My point is, first of all, to the Secretary General of COMESA and to Madame Frazer. Last year, there was a UNEC, that's UN Economic Mission for Africa, and Mbeki Foundation, which indicated that Africa was losing $1.5 trillion through illicit trade. I wanted your comment on that. The reason I state it, I'm also in commodities, and we meet on a daily basis very serious challenges to access the market. For instance, last year I had an opportunity to be at the State Department in New York, invited by former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton. And I had a chance to export coffee to US. I couldn't take that opportunity. So I lost over $6 million worth of trade. So I wanted, if you could state very briefly on that. Then second, also there is a Stanford Oxfam report which talks about these issues. I met our minister, or some of our ministers here, our ministers in Kenya, and even in South Africa. They don't know nothing about these reports. So Stanford report clearly articulates the challenges we have in access to market and the international coffee or commodity mafia. It is not only in coffee. So now if you relate that one to youth employment, which I have been dealing with, and issues of connectivity, there is no way our people in villages can afford basics, or even small monies to access internet, or even set up an infrastructure. These people don't have purchasing power. So it makes, and I can share with you some literature reports I have authored, how local communities are disempowered to participate in the knowledge economy because of the economic disempowerment.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. So, Ambassador, would you like to take that, or Mr.
Yeah,
Ngwenya?
and I'll be very brief. I understand exactly what you're saying. My most direct answer to you is that in this audience is the CEO of the East Africa Exchange, Paul Kakubo. Paul, if you're out there, raise your hand. Or John Bosco, there they are. Get in touch with these guys. One of the things that our commodity exchange is going to do is to, of course, increase the number of buyers that you could sell your product to. You know, that's the whole point of the commodity exchange, is to aggregate all of the produce from this region, make sure that it's at a quality international standard, and therefore be able to, to become more competitive. It's not easy out there. The commodity market especially is not easy, but I think if you go to the East Africa Exchange, which is in Kigali City Towers on the 12th floor, they can have a conversation with you so you would never lose that type of money again.
So, well, thank you very much. Thank you very much. And thank you to our panelists for a great session. And Mr. Ndoro, I think we are done. Thank you, everyone, for coming. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, a big hand for Okaro, our moderator. I think he did a brilliant job there. And we're going to get you from behind the scenes at Bloomberg onto the TV now, because now you've been baptized. But a big hand for Oke for moderating so well. And our panel, thank you very much indeed for your insights and sharing your thoughts with us today. And that brings us to the end of today's sessions, and I think you'll agree it's been a great day all round. And we ended on a high note, I think. So thank you very much indeed for that. Now, listen, tomorrow we're going to take this conversation a little bit further. We started this whole thing about the Smart Africa Manifesto. Do you remember that? Ever heard of that? Okay, Smart Africa Manifesto. So tomorrow, and you might have heard earlier on, the President, particularly President Museveni, was saying that, look, we need to break these things down a little further. So it's all very well to have these big ideas, but we need to apply them in the various areas and various sectors of endeavor. And so tomorrow what we'd like to do is have a smart day, where we start looking at various sectors, for example, smart cities, smart education, smart health, smart infrastructure, sustainable ICT infrastructure. And we're going to have a series of panels. Some of them will be running simultaneously, but I'll explain all of that to you tomorrow, where to go, which one to go. But what we would like is for you to choose an environment that you perhaps have expertise, knowledge, and can really contribute to a robust conversation as we start chunking down to specifics. Okay, so we've got this manifesto. How do we make it real in this particular environment, whether it's education, whether it's urbanization? And that's the thrust of what we're going to be doing tomorrow, having smart conversations about a way forward. So I would ask you, please, if you could try and get here round about 8:30, 8:40, because we need to start on time because these sessions are going to be running together. So the first one is going to be in here, so all of you arrive into this particular venue, and I'm sure that you'll be glad to know that you can bring all the smartphones your bag can carry. So we're back to normal tomorrow, we should be able to clear you through quite quickly. But please come. 8:30, we're going to kick off at exactly 9 o'clock. And it has to run like clockwork, otherwise we'll never get through the day. So, the rest of you, please enjoy the rest of your evening. Enjoy Kigali. Spend some time, go to restaurants, make new friends, do whatever it is that you do when you're away from home. In fact, perhaps not say that. Have a good evening, everybody, and we'll see you tomorrow bright and early.